On my trip back home for work, I was shocked to see our former nanny sitting on my father's bed, casually watching TV. My father, looking pleased, turned to me and said with a smile, "Meet Grace. We've already gotten our marriage license. From now on, she is your mother." I stood there in disbelief, barely processing his words when my phone rang. It was my daughter. As soon as I picked up, her excited voice hit me with another shocker. "Dad, I just got married to my boyfriend. I won't be coming home for the new year." I thought I misheard her. "What? You married that blonde guy? How did you even get a marriage license without the household registration book?" Grace, still sitting comfortably, smirked and responded before my father could. "You don't need that anymore. Marriage is much easier now." Before I could argue, my daughter had already hung up, leaving me stunned. My father, clearly unfazed, urged me. "Why don't you call someone and confirm?" Grace, ever the peacemaker, chimed in. "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal. You're just nitpicking. Titles don't change relationships." Frustrated, I snapped. "What do you mean you don't need a household registration book?" "That's nonsense." "Is it?" Grace chuckled. "You young folks are always on your phones. Just look it up." While my father rummaged through a drawer, I quickly searched for the latest marriage laws on my phone. My heart sank as I read the results. Could it really be this simple now? Was this meant to encourage more people to marry? "Here, look." My father handed me a marriage certificate with their names and a photo. "See? It's official." I wasn't lying. Then he looked me straight in the eye. "Also, since Grace and I are married now, it's not convenient for you to stay here anymore. You have your own place, so you should move out soon." I opened the certificate, my hands trembling. The sight of their smiling faces in the photo sent a surge of anger through me. I threw the document back at Grace and glared at my father. "I told you not to marry her. But you wouldn't listen. You even hid the household registration book to go behind my back. Can't you see what she's after? Don't tell me you actually believe this is about love." Grace gasped dramatically and fell onto the bed, covering her face. My father rushed to her side, glaring at me. What could she possibly want from me? She's kind, she cares for me, and we have genuine feelings for each other. Why do you always assume the worst? Maybe because I see reality for what it is. If I didn't work so hard, we wouldn't even have been able to afford a nanny in the first place. This is all about money. Stop talking about feelings. Grace suddenly sat up and frowned. "That's not fair. Everyone works for a salary at first. But after spending years here, I've come to care about your father. He's a good man and he was alone. We enjoy each other's company. It's fate." I scoffed. "Fate? You're barely older than me, and he's in his 70s. What could you possibly have in common? Or is it the house he'll leave behind that interests you?" "I know this is hard for you, but you can't say things like that," she replied, her voice shaking. "Are you cursing your father?" My father's face turned red with rage. "That's enough. You're already thinking about the inheritance while I'm still alive." He raised his hand as if to slap me, but I caught his wrist midair. "Grace has never once talked about money," he continued. "You, on the other hand, seem to be the one fixated on it. I'll spend my money however I want. If I choose to leave everything to her, that's my decision." He jabbed a finger at my forehead, his voice full of fury. "Get out. Nah. I don't want to see you here anymore." I let out a bitter laugh. "Fine. Since you're married now, I won't be sending you money anymore. You and your new wife can manage on your own." Grace gasped, looking hurt. "We're family now. It's understandable if you don't want to give me anything, but he's still your father. If you don't support him, he could sue you." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that a threat?" She gave a sickly sweet smile. "Of course not. I'm just saying, legally, I am your mother now." Her words dripped with provocation. I clenched my fists, barely controlling my temper. "If you think you can manipulate me like you did my father, you're mistaken. Be careful. Some money isn't worth the cost." With that, I turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. But I had bigger problems to handle now. My daughter's situation needed my immediate attention. The boyfriend she married was a blonde delinquent she had dated in high school. I had only learned about him too late. By then, her grades had already nosedived, and I had to pull her out of school, hire a private tutor, and do everything I could just to get her into a decent university. She moved to another city for college, and I had assumed the distance would break them up. But that boy followed her there. I found out they were still together through a video call. Despite all my warnings and pleas, she refused to listen. To prevent her from making reckless decisions, I had hidden the household registration book. But clearly, that hadn't stopped her. Without wasting time, I booked the earliest flight to her city. I arrived at the university at 8:30 p.m. and immediately called her. "Come outside. I'm at your school gate." She sounded incredulous. "You're here? Right now? If you walk outside, you'll see me." "So, yes, I'm really here." There was a pause before she finally said, "Well, I'm not at school." My stomach dropped. "Then where are you?" "I told you this morning. I'm married now." "Of course, I'm living with my husband." I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. "You're still in school." "The school approved my request to live off campus," she said confidently. "Give me your address." "I'm coming to see you." There was silence on the other end, followed by rustling sounds. Then she sighed, sounding impatient. "Ugh, I've had classes all day, and I'm exhausted. Just get a hotel for the night. I'll find you tomorrow." Before I could respond, the call was abruptly disconnected. When I tried calling back, there was no answer. After multiple attempts, she blocked me entirely. It was clear what was happening. Frustrated, I threw my phone against the wall, taking a deep breath to calm myself before checking into a nearby hotel. The next morning, I went straight to the school gate, waiting for my daughter. This time, I managed to catch her. Beside her stood a young man with messy blonde hair, making him stand out in the crowd. Without thinking, I hurried forward and grabbed her arm. "Mom? What are you doing here?" she asked, startled. "Come with me," I said firmly, pulling her away from the entrance. "Let go," she protested, trying to break free. "People are watching." "I'm only sparing you some embarrassment," I muttered, keeping my grip on her. The blonde boy followed closely, his eyes watching us with caution. I ignored him and stopped a short distance away from the school. "Where are you living now?" I demanded. "I already told you," she replied, shifting uncomfortably. "Take me there." "Nah. Or are you cutting ties with me just because you're married?" "Of course not," she said quickly, stealing a glance at the blonde boy. He stepped forward, his tone unnervingly casual. "Mom, I didn't want her to be late for class. If you want to see our place, I'll take you there." I shot him a glare. "I don't think she'll be attending this semester, so there's no rush. And don't call me Mom." "Mom, stop," my daughter said in frustration. "Don't make a scene." The boy smirked and leaned down to press a kiss on her forehead, his eyes locking with mine in clear provocation. "Don't push me," I warned coldly. "I won't hesitate to slap you in public." My daughter immediately shielded him. "Mom, you used to be so caring. When did you become this violent?" "So you do remember that I cared for you," I said icily. "Stop talking nonsense. If you don't want this to end up on the news, lead the way." We took a bus ride that lasted over an hour, then another 30 minutes on a long-distance route. When we finally reached our stop, the blonde boy gestured toward an old motorcycle. "Hop on," he said confidently. "We're almost there." My daughter was already seated behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. I nearly laughed in disbelief. "Are we seriously doing this?" "James rides fast," she assured me. When we finally arrived, I was speechless. In front of me stood a run-down, self-built house. "Have you lost your mind?" I asked my daughter, pointing at the house. "This is where you want to live? With someone who has no degree, no job, and no future? Look at his hair. It's like a patch of weeds. What exactly do you see in this scrawny kid?" James, who had just pulled off his shirt, smirked and stretched. His ribs were painfully visible with each breath he took. "Do you seriously think that's attractive?" I scoffed. "What is wrong with your generation's standards?" James pointed at me arrogantly. "Listen, lady, I've had just about enough of you. You think I'm worthless just because I don't have money?" I let out a dry laugh. 2 years ago, when Amelia was in high school, you told me not to look down on poor kids. Now, 2 years later, you're still jobless and saying the same thing. How much longer are you planning to use that excuse? Forever. I turned to my daughter. Are you going to keep supporting him with my money? Mom, please, she pleaded. James is good to me. We're married now. We share everything. Isn't that normal? Get out of my way, I snapped, pushing her hand aside. Did you not hear him call me an old hag just now? And you still defend him? He takes care of me, she insisted. He cooks for me. His porridge is the best I've ever had. He picks me up and drops me off every day. I nearly choked on laughter. Because he makes you porridge? Have you never had porridge before? And don't even get me started on that motorcycle. You told me you wanted one, and now I realize you just handed him my money. I sighed, shaking my head. I raised you well. You never lacked food, clothes, or love. How did you end up like this? Stop it, Mom, she said, her voice shaking. Happiness isn't measured by money. I never wanted a luxurious life. Just a simple, warm one. The money you send is enough for us. I narrowed my eyes. So you're saying I should continue giving you money to support this nonsense? She hesitated. Mom, is this about a dowry? Are you angry because you didn't get one for me? My heart clenched at her words. I never imagined you would say something like that. You used to be kind. Now you're cruel. I exhaled sharply. Listen carefully. My stance will not change. If you want to live properly, divorce him. I'll take you to the hospital for an abortion, and we will pretend this never happened. She yanked her hand away, stepping back. I'm not getting a divorce. I'm pregnant. My breath caught in my throat as she placed her hand over her stomach. You're pregnant. She nodded, looking at James with soft eyes. Mom, you don't understand. Love isn't about money. I just want a happy, simple life. I stared at her, my heart breaking. Then hear me now. If you stay with him, consider me dead to you. Don't expect another penny from me. Mom, how can you be so cold-hearted? This child growing inside me is a life too. If you truly loved me, how could you say such cruel things? The man with yellow hair scoffed, his expression full of contempt. Sweetheart, don't bother with her. She's just being stubborn. Give it a few months, and when your belly is bigger, she won't be able to ignore you anymore. By then, she'll have no choice but to hand over the money. His words were filled with mockery, but instead of reacting, my daughter threw herself into his arms, turning her back on me. My heart shattered at the sight. I bought a plane ticket back home. Just one for myself. When a relationship reaches its end, forcing it will only deepen the wounds. If she refuses to wake up to reality, no amount of reasoning will change her mind. It would only fuel her resentment toward me. Family ties mean nothing if they come at the cost of my dignity. I must protect what is mine. At worst, I'll live alone, free from burdens and betrayals. By the time I reached home, it was nearly midnight. To my dismay, I found that the lock on the door had been changed. Well, at least now I don't have to feel guilty about not sending money. Fortunately, I still own a few properties. But my belongings, clothes, bags, were still inside, and I refused to let Grace get her hands on them. I knocked on the door insistently until it finally creaked open. My father stood there, his face dark with irritation. Didn't I tell you to leave? I met his gaze with indifference. I'm just here for my things. Unless you enjoy seeing Grace wear my clothes. As I made my way upstairs, I noticed light seeping from under the study door. Curious, I pressed my ear against it. Grace's voice drifted through. My breath hitched. Grace and James. Their mother and son. All these years, this had been a carefully crafted scheme to steal the family's wealth. Without wasting a second, I rushed downstairs to tell my father. That's ridiculous, he snapped, his disbelief clear. If you think I'm lying, then come upstairs and listen for yourself. I grabbed his arm, and though he resisted, the commotion had already drawn Grace's attention. She emerged from the room, her eyes sharp with suspicion. I wasted no time. James is your son, isn't he? Drop the act. You sent him to trap my daughter, didn't you? Was your plan to sever our bloodline and take everything for yourself? Quite the deception, years of pretending. What nonsense are you spewing? Grace sneered. Your daughter runs after men like a fool. Don't blame me for her bad choices just because you dislike me. Her insults cut deep, but what hurt more was my father's reaction. He took her side. I told you there was no way a worthless punk like James would know Amelia. You're being paranoid. If anything, Amelia's situation is your fault. You raised her. I almost laughed at the absurdity. So that little bastard thought my words were a joke, huh? Well, let's see how funny it is when I stop sending money. Without hesitation, I blocked every contact from my father and Grace. Then I set my phone to reject all unknown numbers and drove to my other home. Every morning, my father and Grace went to the park to dance. Timing their absence perfectly, I hired movers to clear out the house. My belongings, clothes, bags, personal items, were packed away. Even the appliances like the fridge and TV, which I had paid for, were removed. I instructed the movers. Empty the place. Not a single piece of furniture stays. That afternoon, I received a flood of furious calls and messages. I didn't need to check to know they were cursing me. But days later, something unexpected happened. I received a court summons. My father was suing me. I had anticipated this outcome, yet holding the legal notice still left me feeling hollow. During the pre-trial mediation, Grace dominated the conversation, demanding a ridiculous sum, one that would require me to sell a property to afford. I have no money, I stated firmly. Don't listen to her lies. Grace interjected. She owns a company, properties, cars. She's just pretending to be broke. She's heartless. My personal account is nearly empty, I said flatly. The real estate belongs to the company, not me. Your company, your assets, it's all yours, isn't it? My father snapped. I met his gaze without flinching. Then let's settle this in court. We'll see how that works out for you. My father's face contorted with rage. I'm your father. It's your duty to support me. Do you really want to go through with this? Think about how the neighbors will see you. I shrugged. I have no shame. When you kicked me out, you didn't care what the neighbors thought. But now that you need money, suddenly reputation matters? You're contradicting yourself. With that, I simply waited for the court date. Whatever the ruling was, I would pay. No more, no less. After the hearing, as I walked to my car, my father and Grace followed, their voices filled with fury. How could you do this? You emptied the house. How are we supposed to live? Go ask around, I said coldly. Find me another child who does this for parents that threw them away. My father's face twisted in frustration. Your daughter called yesterday. She said you blocked her. Are you really so heartless? Guarding your money from your own family? You'll regret this. I let out a slow, mirthless laugh. The only regret I have is choosing Grace from that home care agency. I got into my car, flipped them off through the window, and drove away. Since my father had no idea where my other properties were, I finally had peace. No more demands. No more debt collectors disguised as family. Life became simple. Work, home, an occasional movie, shopping trips. Until 6 months later, when I stumbled upon a video. It showed my daughter, heavily pregnant, cutting vegetables by an outdoor stove. She looked thin, her cheeks hollow, her skin pale. Her hair was tied up carelessly. I clicked on her profile. The account's profile picture was of the blonde man. The first video was uploaded right after my last visit.
Initially, my daughter hadn't changed much. The first signs of trouble appeared in a video 2 months later. Her mouth had bruises, and her eyes were swollen. The comments were full of people asking if she had been arguing. Later videos showed her responding to the injuries. In the video, my daughter's expression was still arrogant, likely because the blonde guy had appeased her. After we argued, I ignored him. Humph, but he came to apologize obediently. Yes, thank you for your concern. He has promised not to be harsh with me again. Oh, actually, it was a misunderstanding. He was just angry and overdid it. Later, when he saw I was ignoring him, he panicked. Sister knows how to handle her man. I won't let him get away with it. The following videos returned to normal. But after another month, the situation in the videos became more frequent. My daughter looked increasingly haggard, her gaze growing numb. The comments shifted from defending my daughter and criticizing the bad guy to accusing her of being a marriage donkey and discussing whether this was just for show. Even though I had angrily cut off contact, seeing my daughter, who used to be so sheltered, now suffering like this still hurt. When I heard she was pregnant, I realized how deeply involved she was in this relationship. No matter what I said to her or how reasonable or well-intentioned it was, it didn't matter, she wouldn't listen. Instead, the blonde guy could make her do anything without her hesitation. It wasn't necessarily that she loved him deeply. She loved the idea of love she had created. She liked enduring hardship because she had never experienced it and didn't know the true nature of the suffering she would face with him. At that time, I thought she needed to regret her choices before she could truly wake up. People don't learn from advice, they learn from their own experiences. I followed the same route to find my daughter. Before going to the blonde guy's place, I wandered around the area for a while, asking people for information. "Hello, do you know James? You mean Grace's son. Do you know what's going on with their family? There's no wall that doesn't let wind through, and money can't keep all secrets. Grace? I heard she went to work in another city. I don't know what she does. Her husband died early, and she raised the child alone. Her son? Oh, he's a disappointment. He dropped out of school after junior high. I heard he stole something at a factory, got beaten up, and was fired. He never found another job after that. It's not just about stealing. The boy's mind is just not on the right path. He's been hanging out with gangsters. Even if he has low education, if he were willing to work as a waiter or deliver food, he'd still earn something. But he often gambles and is said to owe a lot of money. I don't know what Grace is doing now, but she's managing to support his wasteful spending." After the last person finished talking about the blonde guy's debts, I extended my hand, showed a number, smiled slightly, and gave them $100. After gathering the key information, I went to the blonde guy's place. The blonde guy was outside the door playing cards with a few young men who looked just as disreputable as he did. When he saw me, he was first surprised and then became smug. "I knew you wouldn't ignore her. I saw the videos you posted. Is this how you said you'd treat her?" The blonde guy grinned arrogantly. "Oh, I said that back then, and that's how I felt at the time. Things change. It's not like I'm going back on my word." He continued to shake his leg. One of the young men at the card table asked, "James, who is this auntie?" "My wife's mom." "Oh, your mother-in-law." They all laughed. "Is Amelia home?" I ignored them and walked straight into the house. "Hey, wait a minute." The blonde guy stopped me. "Didn't you say you wanted to cut ties? Now you're rushing to find her. How cheap. Wow. Super Brother is amazing." The three guys laughed even louder. "Do you want me to cut ties with her?" "Cut them if you want. It's none of my business. Anyway, your daughter is already sleeping with me." The blonde guy shook his head and laughed boastfully. "None of your business?" I sneered. "I was actually softening up and thinking of helping you out because of Amelia. But now you're behaving like this." I turned to leave. Mom. The blonde guy quickly changed his tune, chased away the three men, and invited me into the house. "Mom, you should have said so earlier. I wouldn't have been so foolish." The room had poor lighting, and even during the day, it was quite dim. I asked the blonde guy to turn on the lights. My daughter, whom I hadn't seen for 6 months, was sitting by the bed, staring blankly. Her complexion was sallow, her hair was like straw, and her expression was vacant. "Amelia." She looked up at me, seemed stunned for a couple of seconds, and then burst into tears, throwing herself at me. "Mom." She hugged me tightly, and as I returned the embrace, I felt her elbow digging into my hand. "How are you treating her?" Faced with my question, the blonde guy shamelessly lied. "Mom, Amelia is just waiting to give birth. The baby in her belly is mine. How could I treat her badly? When you cut off her living expenses, we had no choice but to make those videos. Amelia is pretty, looks good on camera. She only does a bit of work when filming videos, but normally, I cherish her and spoil her like a little princess. If you don't believe me, ask her. Amelia, is that true? The blonde guy patted her shoulder. In the next moment, I felt her shaking like a leaf in my arms. It was genuine fear. Speak. The blonde guy raised his voice. Mom, James is very good to me. I told you before. My daughter sobbed quietly. I asked the blonde guy to leave and give us some privacy. Why can't we talk in front of me? I haven't seen my daughter for 6 months. I want to have a private conversation with her. Don't worry, what I said earlier wasn't a lie. I came to give you money today, but if you continue with this attitude, I'm leaving right now. Okay, you two talk. After the footsteps outside faded, I turned to my still crying daughter. Do you regret it now? I was wrong, Mom. Do you want to divorce him now? Mom, it's not that I don't want to. I brought up divorce before, but he refused. Later, when I mentioned divorce, he hit me. Now I really don't dare to bring it up again. Do you really want to divorce him? Of course, who would want to live like this? Okay, since you've made up your mind, I'll talk to him. My daughter grabbed my hand nervously. Mom, no. He has a very violent personality. I'm afraid. It's okay, I have a way, and it's not something to discuss right now. What? I didn't answer her question but placed my hand on her belly. What are you going to do about the baby? The baby? I don't know. She shook her head, looking bewildered. I used to love him. When I found out I was pregnant, I was very happy and even fantasized about a happy life with a family of 3. But now, she looked down at her belly, stared for a moment, and then suddenly started hitting her stomach. I grabbed her wrist tightly to calm her down. She cried again, even harder than before. Mom, is my life over? Even if you get divorced, he will use the child as an excuse to find me later. Mom, I'm scared. I don't want to see him again. I patted her back. If I take you to the hospital to get rid of the baby, would you be willing? My daughter nodded, her gaze firm. After calming my daughter's emotions, I went outside to find the blonde guy. He was standing on a small hill smoking a cigarette. When he saw me approaching, he rubbed his 3 fingers together. Have you finished talking? Where's the money? I scanned the QR code and transferred 10,000. The blonde guy's eyes lit up as he looked at his phone. Very generous, Mom. Come often in the future. I can't visit often. We don't live in the same city, and I have my own things to take care of. I still say, you two are not suited for each other. It's better to get a divorce as soon as possible. The blonde guy's face fell immediately. No way, Auntie. You give me a bit of good face and you start playing games. Her belly is so big now, and you still want her to get a divorce? I'll be direct with you. I know about your debts and that Grace is your mother. If you want to know if I'm ruthless, you can ask her. I'm only giving you this one chance. If you plan to use the marriage with Meng Ting to extort me for life, that's absolutely impossible. At worst, I'll pretend I don't have a daughter. But if you give me a number, I'll give you a sum of money to ensure you never harass her again. We can discuss it further. Think carefully. Those lenders won't wait for you forever. The blonde guy was silent for a while and then gave me a number. Auntie, I'm not going to beat around the bush. The divorce isn't so easy now. Don't scare me with talk of cutting ties in the future. We poor folks have ways to make things difficult for you. If you don't give me a satisfactory amount, I won't let her go. The amount he demanded was much higher than the debt I had found out about. He's quite greedy. I can give you the money, but most of my assets are in real estate, and I don't have that much cash flow. Selling properties and cars won't be quick. To stabilize the situation, I agreed to the amount he quoted, regardless of how much it was, because it didn't really matter. After all, the money was never going to be given. I proposed taking my daughter away, but Huang Mao disagreed. Her belly is already this big. I need to take her to the hospital for prenatal checkups. Without your signature, she can't get a divorce anyway. If she wants to divorce you, she'll still need to contact you. Even after I said that, Huang Mao only compromised by agreeing to come with us. Amelia is still my wife. What's the big deal if I stay at her parents' house for a few days? Who knows if what you say is true? If you don't give the money, I lose a tool for controlling you. When my daughter initially eagerly married him, she likely never imagined that the person she looked forward to being with would always see her as a tool. There's no need for that. Since she's so determined to divorce you, having you follow us will only affect her mood. Don't worry, what I promised you will not be less. Besides, there's a 30-day cooling off period, so if you're not satisfied with my offer, you can still back out. With this assurance, Huang Mao finally agreed to let us leave. After taking my daughter back, I immediately took her to the hospital and scheduled an induction. On the day of the procedure, I received a court notice for a hearing. The final result was as I expected. Dad, when I advised you before, what did you say? You said your precious flower would care for people, but now it seems like it's causing you quite a bit of pain. When I came to find Grace, she was lying in bed watching TV, just as she was when I first learned she had married my dad. Arrogant and smug. I looked around the room. The furniture was all new, unrecognizable from before. She didn't get up, just gave me a glance and snorted, "So, now you're willing to humble yourself. If you hadn't been so antagonistic from the beginning, we wouldn't have ended up in court with your dad. Now you're just here to hand over the money, regretting it, aren't you? Why didn't you go to the hearing today? I thought you would be like your son, keeping a tight watch. What does it matter whether I watch or not? Anyway, divorce requires both signatures. At his age, he'll be ahead of me. The house will surely have a share for me, and as for your daughter, well, with a child in her belly, where can she go?" It seems Huang Mao hadn't told her that Amelia had already been brought back by me. "I'm here to tell you the verdict." Before I could finish, she interrupted me, "Just use my old salary card. You know the card number. Don't be unwilling. Even if you send the money to your dad, I'll still need to transfer it to him eventually. It's redundant. But I just sent the money to my dad, $800. Transferring it again isn't troublesome, it's not even close to the limit." $800? Grace suddenly raised her voice and jumped up from the bed. "How can it be just $800? Because my income isn't high." I smiled and handed Grace the documents. She grabbed them, put on her glasses, and scrutinized the verdict under the light, reading it repeatedly from top to bottom. Then she tossed the verdict on the floor. "Fine, fine, you're ruthless. But have you considered this? $800 isn't enough for me, and what about your dad? Even if you secretly give him more money, I'll make sure it's transferred away. Why would you have that illusion that I can't be ruthless? I haven't been managing him for 6 months. If he wants to give away the entire $800, I can't control that, but if you think it's too little, you can divorce." You say divorce just like that. Anyway, if you don't give me money, I'll make a scene. What does the verdict matter? You all can't live peacefully. Grace clutched her chest, breathing heavily as if she was furious, then forced herself to calm down. "Fine, $800 it is. He's your dad, you can neglect him, but I can't be merciless. Considering his age, who knows how long he has left? Just get the house." You're dreaming. If you can wait, can your son wait? What do you mean? When I first learned your son was in debt, I wondered if it was his lack of merit or if you shamelessly seduced an old man to scam money to help him. Shut up. Who are you calling shameless? I grabbed Grace's hand pointing at me and slapped her. Speak properly. No pointing. I'm here today to discuss the divorce. Let's be straightforward. Your son's debt is not small. If you sign the divorce papers, I can give you a sum to cover the debt. But if you want to linger and try to extort more from my other assets, I can quit working and spend all my time watching you. I have both money and time. $800 isn't much, but it won't starve you. If you're willing to live a poor life with him, fine. I'll believe it's true love. But if you mistreat him, I'll call the police. If you're detained frequently, you won't be able to manage your son. Loan sharks aren't as easy to deal with as I am. Can your son withstand this? So, what's it going to be? Will you sign the divorce papers or not? Give me a straight answer." Grace covered her face and glared at me. "Trying to scare me won't work. If the divorce certificate is processed and you back out on the money, won't I lose this house as well? You just said my daughter is pregnant. After you and my dad get divorced, they'll get divorced too. If I don't give the money, with a child on the way, my daughter won't be able to escape. What are you still worried about? Seeing Grace still hesitating, I pushed her again. I know what you're hesitating about. It's because you think it's a big catch and you're reluctant to let it go without getting a fair amount. Enough is enough. I'm proposing this condition because I'm tired of the hassle. If you keep dragging this out and trying to get more from me, I won't help you with the debt anymore. After the 30-day cooling-off period, my dad successfully obtained the divorce certificate. Once he had the certificate, he hurried back to his car, avoiding Grace as if she were a plague. Grace blocked our car. The certificate has been obtained. When will the money be transferred? Money? Haha, like I said before, you're dreaming. How dare you play me? Grace was momentarily stunned, then her face turned red with rage as she pounded on the car door. Don't forget, your daughter is still in our home. Do you think she'll have a peaceful life with you acting like this? I've already taken my daughter away. Looks like your stupid son hasn't told you. What? Well, fine. Even if you've taken her away, they're still married. I won't let him sign the papers. If you dare to mess with me, you're doomed. They still have a child. Your family will never have a peaceful life. The child is gone. I hit Grace's hand with the spare umbrella from the car. She cried out in pain and let go of the car door. She's already had the induction. As for whether your son signs the papers, it doesn't matter. I've already taken my daughter to collect evidence. The domestic violence evidence has been submitted to the court. There's no cooling off period for filing for divorce. I closed the car door and drove away, leaving Grace clutching her chest, collapsing on the ground, convulsing. I moved my dad and daughter to a new house and sold the old one. Not long after, I received a call from the hospital. That day, Grace had a stroke. The Civil Affairs Bureau staff called 120 to take her to the hospital, but they couldn't reach her family. They found my contact information through Grace's phone. I didn't have to get involved, but seeing the new divorce certificate in my hand, I felt it was worth visiting her. After all, I was the one who personally chose her from the home service company. Finally, I anticipated an unceremonious farewell. The nurse took me to the hospital room. Before I went in, she specifically instructed me not to stimulate the patient, but my presence was bound to stimulate her. That's precisely why I came. When I entered, Grace was awake. She lay in bed, her face twisted and her eyes askew, no trace of the previous arrogance. What are you doing here? She was agitated to see me. I didn't remind her not to get excited. Instead, I showed her the divorce certificate. Her agitation increased. I stood back a bit, not because she was cursing but because her words were spraying saliva. I dialed Huang Mao's number in front of her and put it on speakerphone. How's it going? Did you sell the house? Is the money ready? No. What did you say? I said I was lying, you fool. But I didn't lie about one thing. I did have someone look for the high-interest loan sharks you borrowed from. Before the court hearing, I had them informed that you had run away, and you won't be repaying the money. With just $100, local residents were quite helpful. I ended the call and blocked the number. I didn't know how Huang Mao would react, but Grace now vividly demonstrated the term wide-eyed with rage. She gritted her teeth, saliva dripping from the corner of her mouth, wetting the pillow. Her clenched fists were not normal. She was tapping the nightstand with her thumb pressed in the middle. I didn't come here today to pay for your medical expenses. Your son is your family, and we were merely in an employment relationship that ended 6 months ago. So, I'm here purely to provoke you and to tell you one thing: don't be so possessive over other people's money. I warned you long ago to be careful with your money. What's happening today could very well be karma. With that, I left the hospital room. While waiting for the elevator, I heard a loud crash from the far end of the corridor, like something heavy hitting the ground, followed by Grace's wailing. But that was no longer my concern.